The mirror doesn't lie, but it doesn't tell the whole truth either. I run my fingers through silver hair that once cascaded like wheat in summer wind, and I see Margaret Thompson at 84, weathered hands that have kneaded 10,000 loaves of bread, eyes that have watched children grow into strangers, and a mouth that has spoken more goodbyes than hellos in recent years. But today, something different stirs behind my reflection. Today, I'm nervous like I was at 17, except now I know exactly what I have to lose. My daughter Susan arranged this lunch, though she doesn't know the half of it. "Mom, you need to get out more," she said last week, her voice carrying that particular brand of concern adult children reserve for aging parents. "There's this lovely gentleman at the senior center, William Patterson. Lost his wife 2 years ago. Very distinguished, still drives." She rattled off his credentials like a resume. Retired English teacher, 2 grown sons, volunteers at the library. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I once knew a Billy Patterson who taught me about Keats and kisses in equal measure 57 years ago. The restaurant Susan chose is one of those family places with checkered tablecloths and the scent of garlic bread perpetually hanging in the air. Saul's Italian Kitchen. I arrived 15 minutes early because punctuality was drilled into me by a mother who believed lateness was a character flaw, and because I need time to study every man who walks through that door. My hands shake slightly as I order coffee, black, the way I've taken it since Harold died, and I stopped caring about small pleasures, and I position myself where I can see the entrance. 3 men enter in the first 10 minutes. The first is clearly too young, maybe 60, with a spring in his step that speaks of unearned confidence. The second moves with a walker, his careful navigation of the tables triggering a wave of recognition, not of him, but of my own fragility, the way my knees protest when I rise from bed each morning. The third man pauses in the doorway, scanning the restaurant with eyes that seem to be searching for something specific, something lost. My heart performs a complicated rhythm against my ribs. 57 years collapse into nothing as I see the line of his shoulders, still broad but softer now, the way he tilts his head when he's thinking. His hair has gone completely white, and his face carries the topography of a full life, laugh lines, worry lines, the subtle sag that comes with decades of gravity's patient work. But those eyes, green like sea glass, exactly as I remember them. He spots me and freezes. For a moment that stretches like taffy, we simply stare at each other across the crowded restaurant. Then he walks toward my table with the deliberate gait of a man who has learned to be careful with his steps, and I realize I'm holding my breath. "Margaret?" His voice carries the same gentle rasp it had when we were young, though now it's seasoned with age and perhaps disbelief. "Margaret, is that really you?" I nod because speech seems impossible. He's William now, not Billy. I can see it in the way he carries himself, the careful dignity of someone who has spent decades standing in front of classrooms, commanding respect. But underneath, I catch glimpses of the boy who once climbed through my bedroom window just to lie beside me and read Wordsworth aloud. "May I?" He gestures toward the chair across from me, and I nod again, not trusting my voice. He sits slowly, the careful descent of joints that have earned their stiffness, and for a moment we simply look at each other. I catalog the changes, the deeper lines around his eyes, the way his hands show the brown spots of age, the slight tremor in his left hand that might be Parkinson's or might just be nerves. "This is impossible," he says finally, and his voice cracks on the word impossible. When Susan Patterson mentioned she was setting up her mother, Margaret Thompson, I thought, I hoped, but I never imagined. Susan Patterson, the name hits me like cold water. "Your daughter-in-law?" He shakes his head, smiling for the first time, and it's exactly the same smile that made me forget my own name when I was 27. My daughter. She hyphenated when she married, kept both names. Susan Patterson Miller now, but she's always used Patterson professionally. The pieces click into place with an almost audible snap. My Susan and his Susan working together at the senior center, conspiring to introduce their lonely parents without realizing they were orchestrating the world's most unlikely reunion. I start to laugh, not the polite chuckle of an elderly lady, but the helpless, slightly hysterical laughter of a woman confronting the cosmic joke of her own life. They don't know, I manage between fits of laughter. They have no idea. None whatsoever, he agrees, and now he's laughing too, the sound rusty but genuine. Susan's been telling me about this wonderful woman, a widow, very dignified, excellent cook. She's been quite persistent. My Susan thinks you sound like a catch, I say, wiping tears from my eyes. Distinguished, she said, still drives. I do still drive, he says with mock pride, though only in daylight now, and never when it's raining. The laughter fades, gradually, leaving us in a silence that feels both comfortable and charged. The restaurant continues its lunchtime bustle around us. Families celebrating birthdays, business meetings over pasta, the casual conversations of people who don't know they're witnessing the resurrection of something that was buried decades ago. You look beautiful, he says quietly, and the words land like a physical touch. Different, but beautiful. I would have known you anywhere. I want to deflect the compliment, to make a joke about gravity and wrinkles and the cruel passage of time. Instead, I find myself saying, you look exactly like I knew you would, like Billy, but with the weight of a full life. His expression grows serious at the mention of his younger self. Billy's been gone a long time, Margaret. A lot has happened since. Since I broke your heart, I finish quietly. He's quiet for a moment, studying his hands. Since you made the practical choice, he corrects. Since you chose security over uncertainty, I understood, even then. But I remember it differently. I remember the way his face crumpled when I told him I was marrying Harold Thompson, a man with a steady job and a 5-year plan and no poetry in his soul. I remember Billy's eyes filling with tears as he nodded and said he hoped I'd be happy. I remember him asking if there was any chance, in another life, that things might have been different, and me saying, maybe, just maybe, but not in this one. Tell me about your life, I say, because I need to know how the story continued after I closed the book on us. Tell me about the years between. He signals the waitress for coffee, buying himself time to think. When she leaves, he begins to speak in the measured tones of someone who has learned to choose his words carefully. I taught high school English for 38 years. Never quite made it to college level like I planned, but I loved those kids. Married Ruth Henley in 1970. You remember Ruth? She was 2 years behind us in school. Sweet girl, patient with my moods. He pauses, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. We had 2 boys, David and Michael. David's a doctor in Seattle now. Michael teaches history in Denver. Ruth died 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer. It was quick, which was a mercy, I suppose. I reach across the table and cover his hand with mine, feeling the fragile bones beneath papery skin. I'm sorry. I remember Ruth. She was kind. She was, he agrees. She knew about you, you know. Not everything, but enough. She knew there had been someone before her, someone who mattered. She never asked for details, and I never offered them. But sometimes she'd catch me staring off into space, and should get this knowing look. Should say, "Thinking about your first love, William?" And I'd say, "Just thinking," and should let it be. The honesty of it takes my breath away. Here was a marriage built on partial truths and gentle deceptions, the way most long unions are. It sounds both heartbreaking and exactly right. What about you? He asks. Tell me about Harold. Harold, my husband of 52 years, father to my 3 children, the man who built me a life of comfortable predictability. How do I explain Harold to the man I let go so I could have that predictability? Harold was a good man, I begin, tasting the inadequacy of the words. Reliable, hardworking, devoted to the children. He sold insurance for 40 years, never missed a day of work that wasn't scheduled. We had Susan, then the twins, Robert and Patricia. They're all successful, all married, all producing grandchildren for me to spoil. I pause, trying to find the right words. It was a good life, Billy, William, a solid life. Harold never surprised me, but he never disappointed me either. But, he prompts gently, I look down at my wedding ring, the simple gold band I still wear, though Harold's been gone 6 years. How do I explain the subtle ache that lived in my chest for 52 years, the way I sometimes caught myself listening for a different kind of laughter, a different way of seeing the world? But sometimes I'd hear a poem on the radio or see someone reading in a park, and I'd remember what it felt like to have my mind set on fire by ideas instead of grocery lists, I admit. Harold thought poetry was impractical. He wasn't wrong, but he wasn't entirely right either. William's eyes grow soft with understanding. Do you still read it? Poetry? Every day, I confess. I have a collection of Keats on my nightstand, the same edition you gave me for my 26th birthday. His breath catches audibly. You kept it? I kept it through 3 moves, 5 decades, and Harold's periodic campaigns to declutter. I told him it was a college textbook. I meet his eyes across the table. I lied about a lot of things to keep that book. The admission hangs between us like a bridge we're both afraid to cross. The restaurant has grown quieter around us, the lunch rush giving way to the sleepy afternoon lull. I realize we've been talking for nearly 2 hours, our untouched coffee growing cold, our carefully planned blind date transformed into something entirely different. Margaret, he says, and my name sounds different in his mouth now, weighted with all the years between then and now. I need to tell you something. When Susan suggested this lunch, I thought about canceling a dozen times. I thought about lying, saying I was sick or had another commitment. Because for 57 years, I've carried around the idea of you like a photograph in my wallet. Perfect, unchanging, frozen at 27, and heartbreakingly beautiful. My chest tightens with the familiar pain of lost time, lost chances. I was terrified, he continues, that meeting you again would ruin that I'd see you and feel nothing, or worse, that you'd see me and feel nothing. That would make small talk about grandchildren and prescription medications and discover that what we had was just the foolishness of youth, not worth the decades I've spent wondering about it. I want to reach for his hand again, but I'm afraid that touching him will make this too real, will crack open something I've kept carefully sealed for most of my adult life. And now, I whisper, he studies my face with an intensity that makes me feel exposed, seen in ways I haven't been in years. Now, I think, I was an old fool for waiting so long to find out if you still laugh at the same things, if you still get that little crease between your eyebrows when you're thinking hard, if you still believe that words can save us from ourselves. And suddenly, I'm crying, not the dignified tears of a well-composed elderly woman, but the messy, overwhelming sobs of someone who has been holding her breath for 57 years and can finally exhale. He reaches for his handkerchief, the old-fashioned kind men of his generation still carry, and offers it across the table. I'm sorry, I manage through the tears. I don't know why I'm. Don't apologize, he says firmly. Don't you dare apologize for feeling something. I take the handkerchief. It smells like aftershave and lavender. probably from Ruth's laundry soap, and try to compose myself. But the tears keep coming, carrying with them decades of careful restraint, of choosing safety over passion, of wondering what might have been. I've made such sensible choices my whole life, I whisper. Such careful, practical, sensible choices. And now I'm 84 years old and sitting across from you, and all I can think is that I wasted it. I wasted all of it. No, his voice is sharp enough to cut through my spiral of regret. No, Margaret, you didn't waste anything. You raised 3 children, you made Harold happy, you built a life, a good life. Just because it wasn't the life we might have had together doesn't make it wasted. But his words, meant to comfort, only make me cry harder, because he's right and wrong at the same time, and I'm too old to untangle the complex mathematics of a life lived in the conditional tense. I have thought of Billy Patterson at least once every single day for 57 years. When Harold proposed, when each of my children was born, when we moved to our first house and I planted a garden full of practical vegetables instead of the wildflower meadow I secretly wanted, when Harold had his heart attack at 68, when the children grew up and moved away, when I sat beside my husband's deathbed and held his hand and thought about the terrible mercy of loving someone safely, without risk, without the devastating possibility of being truly known and truly seen. And now Billy, William, sits across from me, 77 years old, and still capable of setting my careful world on fire with nothing more than his attention, and I don't know what to do with the weight of all this feeling. The waitress approaches our table hesitantly, probably wondering why the elderly woman is sobbing into her coffee. "Are you folks ready to order lunch?" she asks with practiced kindness. William looks at me questioningly, and I realize I haven't even looked at the menu. "I think we need a few more minutes," he tells her gently. When she leaves, he leans forward. "Margaret, look at me." I raise my eyes to his, feeling exposed and ridiculous and more alive than I have in years. "We're here," he says simply. "Right now, in this moment, we're both here. That has to count for something." The afternoon stretches between us like an uncharted territory. We order soup and sandwiches neither of us wants, more to justify our occupation of the table than from any real hunger. I find myself studying his hands as he tears his bread into precise pieces, the same careful, methodical way he approached everything when we were young. Some things, it seems, don't change, even across the span of nearly 6 decades. "Tell me about your children," I say, because I need to understand the shape his life took without me in it. What are they like? His face transforms when he talks about David and Michael, the way all parents' faces do when given permission to brag. David, the serious one, who decided in 3rd grade he wanted to be a doctor and never wavered from that path. Michael, the dreamer, who inherited his father's love of stories and history. Both married, both living too far away for regular visits, but dutiful about phone calls and flying home for holidays. David has 2 girls, 8 and 10. They're terrifyingly smart. Michael has a son, 15, who thinks poetry is for losers, and his grandfather is hopelessly out of touch. William's smile carries the particular fondness grandparents reserve for grandchildren who challenge them. I keep trying to find something we can connect over. Last Christmas, I attempted to understand his video games. It didn't go well. I laugh, recognizing the universal struggle of aging grandparents trying to bridge the gap to a generation that seems to speak an entirely different language. Susan's oldest is 16. She barely looks up from her phone when she visits, but occasionally she'll ask me to tell her stories about the old days. Apparently, my childhood counts as historical fiction to her. "Do you tell her about us?" The question slips out before he can stop it, and I see the immediate regret in his eyes, as if he's revealed something he meant to keep private. The question catches me off guard in its directness. Do I tell Emma about the boy who taught me that love could be an intellectual pursuit as much as a physical one? About the way Billy Patterson could make me understand Shakespeare's sonnets by explaining them while we lay in summer grass, his voice turning words into something approaching prayer? Sometimes, I admit, not directly, but sometimes when she asks about being young, about dating, I find myself talking about someone who treated words like gifts, who believed that the right poem could change your entire understanding of the world. I pause, considering. She thinks I'm talking about her grandfather. Harold read poetry? Harold read insurance manuals and popular mechanics. I learned to keep that part of myself separate. The admission feels like betrayal and relief in equal measure. William's expression grows thoughtful. Ruth tried to read the books I recommended. Sweet of her, but she never really enjoyed them. She preferred romance novels, the kind with pictures of shirtless men on the cover. She said they were more fun than Yeats. Were they? I ask, genuinely curious. He considers this seriously. Probably. Ruth was better at living in the moment than I was. I was always looking for deeper meaning, universal truth in everything. She could enjoy a sunset without needing it to represent something larger than itself. There's such tenderness in the way he talks about his late wife that I feel a stab of something that might be jealousy if I were young enough to indulge in such feelings. Instead, it's more like wistfulness for the kind of marriage where you can be known without being understood, loved without being fully seen. Do you think we would have been happy? The question escapes before I can stop it, hanging in the air between us like something fragile and dangerous. William is quiet for a long time, long enough for me to regret asking. When he finally speaks, his voice is careful, measured. I think we would have been magnificent, and probably a disaster, he says. I think we would have read to each other in bed and fought about money and traveled to places where we could argue about literature in beautiful settings. I think I would have loved you so completely, it would have frightened both of us. His honesty takes my breath away. This is the difference between being young and being old. The luxury of truth, the permission to speak the things that would have been too dangerous to say at 27. I think, I say slowly, that we would have made each other better and worse in all the ways that matter. I think I would have written poetry instead of grocery lists and probably burned dinner once a week because I was too distracted by whatever book you'd brought home. Would you have been happy? He asks, turning my question back to me. I consider this, really consider it, weighing the hypothetical against the reality I chose. I think I would have been terrified and exhilarated and more myself than I ever got to be with Harold. Whether that equals happiness? I shrug. I don't know, but it would have been worth finding out. The weight of this admission settles over us. We're too old for regrets to be anything more than academic exercises, too old for what-ifs to change anything material about our lives. But somehow that makes them safer to examine, like looking at old photographs of people who no longer exist. I have a confession, William says, leaning forward conspiratorially. After Ruth died, I looked you up, online. It took me 3 hours and help from Michael, but I found your address, your phone number, photos of you at church functions, and Susan's wedding. My heart does something irregular against my ribs. You did? I spent 6 months drafting a letter I never sent. I must have written 20 different versions. Casual and friendly, deeply romantic, everything in between. I kept thinking about showing up on your doorstep like some character from a movie. But then I'd imagine your face when you opened the door and saw this old man claiming to be your first love. The image makes me laugh, but it's a sad sound. I would have slammed the door and called the police. Exactly. So I convinced myself it was better to leave the past alone, to let you have your memories without contaminating them with the reality of who I'd become. He pauses, stirring his soup without eating it. But then Susan mentioned this lunch, and I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe the universe was trying to tell me something. Do you believe in that? The universe sending messages? I believe in being open to possibility, he says. I believe that sometimes life gives us second chances, even when we don't deserve them. The afternoon sun has shifted, streaming through the restaurant's windows and highlighting the silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes that speak of decades of laughter and worry and the simple act of living. He's beautiful in the way aged things can be beautiful, weathered but authentic, marked by time but not defeated by it. What do we do now? I ask, because someone needs to address the practical reality of this impossible situation. Our children think they've arranged a nice lunch between two lonely seniors. They don't know they've orchestrated the reunion of the century. William smiles, and it's the same mischievous expression I remember from when he convinced me to skip my American history class to lie on the quad and count clouds. Well, we could tell them the truth, watch their faces when they realize their matchmaking efforts have been more successful than they could have possibly imagined. Susan will be insufferable, I say, but I'm smiling too. She'll take full credit for bringing us back together and probably write a blog post about it. Michael will want to analyze the psychological implications. He's always looking for patterns in human behavior to use in his teaching. We sit in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us grinning at the thought of our well-meaning children discovering they've accidentally reunited a decades-old love story. It feels good to laugh with someone who remembers who I used to be before I became somebody's mother, somebody's wife, somebody's widow. There's something else, William says, his tone growing more serious, something I need to tell you about why I really came today. My stomach tightens with anxiety. In my experience, conversations that begin with, "I need to tell you something," rarely end well. I'm sick, Margaret. Parkinson's disease. Early stages still, but progressing steadily. The tremor in my hand, the way I'm more careful walking, it's only going to get worse. The words hit me like a physical blow. I look at his left hand, the slight shake I'd attributed to nerves or age, and suddenly see it for what it really is. The beginning of the end of his independence, his dignity, his ability to be the man he's always been. How long have you known? 6 months. Long enough to adjust to the reality, not long enough to make peace with it. He's quiet for a moment, then continues. The doctors say I have good years left, maybe quite a few good years, but eventually, I won't be able to take care of myself. David wants me to move to Seattle, closer to him. Michael thinks I should go into one of those nice assisted living places where they have book clubs and organized activities. What do you want? I want to stay in my house, in my garden, with my books and my memories and my stubborn independence for as long as possible. His voice carries the fierce determination of someone who has spent a lifetime being self-sufficient and can't imagine any other way to exist. But I want something I thought I'd lost forever. I want someone to share the good days with. Someone who knew me before I became this careful old man who has to think about every step. The implication hangs in the air between us, too large and complicated to examine directly. Is he asking me to be part of his decline, to watch him lose pieces of himself bit by bit? Is he offering me a chance at the love story we never got to finish, even though we both know how this version will end? William, I begin, but he holds up his hand to stop me. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now. I'm not even sure what I'm asking, to be honest. I couldn't see you again and not tell you the truth about where I am, who I am now. if we're going to be friends or whatever this is going to become, I need you to know all of it. Friends. The word feels simultaneously too small and too large for what's happening between us. We were never friends. We went straight from strangers to lovers to heartbroken former lovers with no intermediate stage. The possibility of friendship at 84 and 77, complicated by illness and the weight of shared history, seems both precious and impossible. Can I ask you something? I say. When you got the diagnosis, when the doctor first said the words Parkinson's disease, what was the first thing you thought about? He's quiet for so long, I wonder if he's going to answer. When he does speak, his voice is barely above a whisper. I thought about the last line of that Keats poem you used to love. A thing of beauty is a joy forever. And I realized that even if everything else falls apart, even if my body betrays me and my mind follows, I got to love you when we were young and beautiful and believed the whole world was ours for the taking. That has to be worth something. The tears come again, but this time they're different. Not the desperate sobs of earlier, but the quiet overflow of a heart that's been holding too much for too long. I reach across the table and take both of his hands in mine, feeling the tremor that will only grow stronger, the fragile architecture of bones and skin that houses a mind I've never stopped loving. Billy, I whisper, using his young name because somehow it feels more true than William in this moment. That poem isn't about love. It's about art, about beauty that transcends time. I know, he says, squeezing my hands gently, but I've spent 57 years believing that what we had was both love and art, beauty that transcends time. And suddenly I understand what he's really asking me, not to be his caregiver or his consolation prize or his last chance at romance. He's asking me to believe, with him, that some things are worth having even when you know they'll end badly, that some love stories are worth finishing even when the ending is written in advance. I look at this man who taught me that words could be weapons and shields and prayers all at once, who made me understand that love could be an intellectual pursuit as much as a physical one. He's older now, marked by time and illness and the weight of a life fully lived. But his eyes still hold the same intensity that made me forget my own name when I was 27, the same fierce intelligence that made me believe for one brief summer that anything was possible. What are you asking me exactly? I need to hear him say it, need the words to be clear between us. He takes a deep breath, and I can see him summoning courage the same way he used to before reading his poetry aloud in class. I'm asking if you want to find out what our love story looks like when we're old enough to know better, but still young enough to feel everything. I'm asking if you want to spend whatever time I have left, whether it's 2 years or 10 years, discovering who we are when we're not 27 and afraid of making the wrong choice. The restaurant has grown quiet around us, the late afternoon lull settling over the mostly empty tables. Somewhere in the kitchen, dishes clatter and a radio plays something soft and instrumental. The world continues its regular business while I sit here being offered a chance to rewrite the ending of my life. The silence stretches between us, heavy with possibility and terror in equal measure. I can feel William watching me, patient in the way only old people can be patient, not because we have all the time in the world, but because we understand that some decisions can't be rushed, even when time is running out. My practical mind, the mind that chose Harold over Billy all those years ago, begins its familiar litany of objections. I'm 84 years old. I have arthritis in my hands, high blood pressure that requires 3 different medications, and a hearing aid I pretend not to need. I've been widowed for 6 years and have finally achieved a comfortable routine. Bridge on Tuesdays, library volunteering on Thursdays, Sunday dinners with Susan's family, where I can be the competent grandmother who brings homemade cookies and sensible advice. What William is proposing would shatter all of that careful construction. It would mean learning to love someone new while watching him slowly lose pieces of himself to disease. It would mean becoming vulnerable again, opening my heart to the kind of loss I swore I'd never risk after Harold died and left me with grief so profound I thought it might kill me. But there's another voice, quieter but more insistent, that's been growing stronger with each word William has spoken. It's the voice of the 27-year-old who chose safety over passion and has spent 57 years wondering if she chose wrong. It's the voice that whispers poetry to itself in the dark hours before dawn, the voice that kept a book of Keats hidden in a drawer like a talisman against the ordinary. "Tell me about your days," I say finally. "Tell me what your life looks like now." He seems to understand that this isn't deflection, but assessment, the practical evaluation of a woman who learned long ago that love without logistics is just fantasy. "I wake up at 6:30 every morning, whether I want to or not," he begins, and I smile because this is exactly the kind of detail I need to hear. "I make coffee, too strong, according to Ruth, and read the paper cover to cover, including the obituaries. I check to see if anyone I knew has died, and then I feel guilty for being relieved when they haven't. I do the same thing, I admit. It's the most morbid form of roll call." Exactly. After the paper, I take a walk around the neighborhood. 2 miles, same route, every day, because the neurologist says exercise helps slow the progression. I speak to Mrs. Chen, who tends her roses like they're her children, and avoid Mr. Rodriguez, who wants to tell me about his grandson's soccer achievements every single day. I can picture it perfectly, the careful routine of someone who has learned to structure his days because structure is what keeps chaos at bay. It's not so different from my own schedule, the way I've organized my life into manageable segments that leave little room for spontaneity or surprise. Afternoons I spend reading or working in my garden. I grow tomatoes and herbs, nothing fancy, but enough to feel useful. I volunteer at the library on Wednesdays, helping people with computer problems I barely understand myself. He pauses, considering. Evenings are the hardest. That's when the house feels too big, too quiet. I usually fall asleep reading in my chair and wake up at midnight with a crick in my neck. It's such an honest accounting of elderly solitude that I want to reach across the table and gather him into my arms. Instead, I nod in recognition. I wake up at 5:30, I tell him, earlier than I need to, but sleeping later feels indulgent somehow. I make tea, Earl Grey, the same brand I've used for 40 years, and watch the morning news while I plan my day. Not because I have so much to do, but because planning makes me feel purposeful. What do you plan? Grocery shopping on Mondays, laundry on Wednesdays, cleaning on Fridays. Bridge club, library volunteering, church on Sundays. Susan calls every Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock precisely. The twins check in sporadically. Robert usually texts instead of calling, and Patricia sends long emails with photos of the grandchildren. I pause, realizing how regimented it sounds when spoken aloud. I read for hours every day, poetry, novels, biographies of people who lived more interesting lives than mine. I have a subscription to 3 different literary magazines that I probably shouldn't spend money on, but consider necessary for my mental health. Which magazines? The question delights me because it's exactly the kind of detail that matters. Not whether I read, but what I choose to read, what feeds my particular hungers. Poetry magazine, The Atlantic, and the Paris Review. I tell myself they keep me intellectually current, but mostly they make me feel connected to a world of ideas that exists beyond the boundaries of my small life. I read the Paris Review too, he says, and his smile is radiant. And Harper's, and the New York Review of Books, though I have to admit I sometimes fall asleep reading the longer pieces. This exchange of domestic details might seem mundane, but it feels like the most intimate conversation I've had in years.
We're not just sharing information, we're revealing the texture of our daily existence, the small choices and habits that define who we've become in our old age. William, I say, testing the weight of his adult name, what would it look like if I said yes to whatever this is you're proposing? What would we do? He leans back in his chair, and I can see him imagining it, sketching the shape of a life neither of us expected to have. I think we'd take it slowly, he says. We're not 27 anymore, rushing toward everything like the world might end tomorrow. We could have dinner together, real dinners where we argue about books and remember stories from before. We could go to places we always said we'd visit, that little theater downtown that does Shakespeare, the botanical gardens in spring when everything's blooming. I've never been to the botanical gardens, I confess. Harold thought paying to look at flowers was frivolous when we had a perfectly good yard. Then we'll go to the botanical gardens, he says, with the kind of certainty that suggests it's already decided. We'll go in April when the tulips are blooming, and I'll read you the Jared Manley Hopkins poem about spring, the one that goes, "Nothing is so beautiful as spring." The image he paints is so vivid, I can almost feel spring sun on my face, almost hear his voice weaving poetry through the rustle of new leaves.
But practical Margaret, the Margaret who survived 84 years by thinking things through, raises her cautious head. And when the Parkinson's gets worse, when you can't walk through gardens or remember the words to poems. His expression doesn't change, but something shifts behind his eyes, a flicker of the fear he's been holding at bay. Then we'll adapt. We'll find other ways to be together. You can read to me when I can't hold books steady. I can listen to your voice when mine gets too shaky to trust. And when it gets really bad, when you need help with everything, then you'll have a choice to make, he says quietly, and I'll understand whatever you decide. The honesty of this answer breaks something open in my chest. He's not asking me to promise forever, not pretending that love conquers all. He's asking me to walk into this with my eyes open, knowing exactly what I'm signing up for. I watched Harold die, I tell him, slowly over months. I held his hand while he forgot my name, while he became someone I didn't recognize. I swore I'd never do that again, never love someone enough to lose them that completely. I know, William says. I know what I'm asking. Do you? Do you really understand what it's like to watch someone you love disappear piece by piece? To become a caregiver instead of a partner? To have conversations with someone who's already half gone? My voice is rising, and I'm aware that the few remaining customers are glancing our way, but I can't seem to stop. All the grief I thought I'd processed, all the careful walls I've built around my heart are crumbling in the face of this impossible choice. Ruth didn't have time to disappear, he says gently. The cancer took her quickly, too quickly for goodbyes, but also too quickly for the kind of slow erosion you're describing. I watched my father go that way instead. Alzheimer's, 10 years of forgetting everything that made him who he was. Then you know, I whisper, you know why I can't. I know why you shouldn't, he corrects. I know why any rational person would say no, but I also know that we're both old enough to understand that love isn't rational, and we're both running out of time to pretend it is. I close my eyes and see myself at Harold's bedside in those final weeks, when he confused me with his mother and asked when his children were coming to visit, though they'd been there that morning. I remember the weight of being the keeper of someone else's history, the exhaustion of carrying two sets of memories when one person could no longer hold their own. But I also remember the afternoon Harold suddenly seemed to surface from the fog of medication and confusion, looked at me with perfect clarity, and said, "Maggie, have I been a good husband to you?" And how I'd said yes without hesitation, because despite everything, we'd never been to each other. He had been good, steady and faithful and kind in his limited way. What if I'm not strong enough? I ask. What if I love you and then lose you, and it breaks something in me that can't be fixed? What if you don't love me and spend whatever time you have left wondering what might have been? He counters. What if safe is just another word for half alive? The question hangs between us like a challenge. I think about my careful routine, my predictable days, the way I've organized my life around avoiding risk and disappointment. It's been a successful strategy for survival, but sitting here with William, I'm forced to confront the possibility that survival and living might be two entirely different things. I need time, I say finally. I need to think about this. Of course, he signals for the check, the gesture practical and decisive. Take all the time you need. I've waited 57 years. I can wait a little longer. But even as he says it, I can see the slight tremor in his hand as he reaches for his wallet, the careful way he stands from his chair. Time is exactly what we don't have, what we've already squandered in spectacular fashion. The waitress brings our check, and William insists on paying despite my protests. Call it an investment in possibility, he says with a smile that makes me remember why I fell in love with him in the first place. We walk to the parking lot together, and I'm hyper-aware of the space between us, the way we don't quite touch but seem to orbit around each other like binary stars. His car is a sensible Honda, clean and well-maintained, with a handicapped parking placard hanging from the rearview mirror that makes my heart clench with the reality of his diagnosis. "Margaret," he says as we reach my car, a practical Toyota that Susan helped me choose after Harold died. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that seeing you today, talking with you, remembering who we used to be together, it's been the best afternoon I've had in years. I want to say something equally gracious, something that acknowledges the gift he's given me in his honesty and vulnerability. Instead, what comes out is, I kept your book." He stares at me for a moment, then begins to laugh, the same delighted, surprised laughter I remember from when we were young. "You said that already." "I know, but I needed to say it again, because keeping that book was the most romantic thing I've ever done. And I need you to know that. I need you to know that I never forgot you, not completely." "I know," he says softly. "I never forgot you either." He doesn't try to kiss me goodbye, doesn't reach for my hand or make any of the gestures that might seal this moment into something definitive. Instead, he simply stands there while I get into my car, watching me with the patient attention of someone who has learned to treasure small moments because they understand how precious they are. As I drive home through the familiar streets of the life I've built without him, I catch glimpses of my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick is worn off, my carefully styled hair is mussed from the autumn wind, and my eyes are bright with unshed tears. I look like a woman who has been thoroughly shaken from her comfortable routine, and for the first time in years, that doesn't terrify me. It exhilarates me. The phone rings at exactly 7 o'clock Tuesday evening, just as it has every week for the past 6 years. Susan's punctuality is one of those family traits that skipped a generation. Her twins are chronically late to everything, but which serves as a comforting anchor in my otherwise unstructured days. "Hi, Mom." Her voice carries the particular blend of affection and duty that characterizes adult children checking in on aging parents. "How was your week?" How was my week? Where do I begin? How do I tell my daughter that her matchmaking efforts have been more successful than she could possibly imagine? That the nice widower she introduced me to is actually the love of my youth, the road not taken, made flesh and blood, and sitting across from me in Saul's Italian kitchen, asking me to rewrite the ending of my life? It was fine, dear, quiet. I had lunch with William Patterson one Sunday. Oh, wonderful. I was hoping you'd call and tell me how it went, but I didn't want to pry. Susan's voice brightens with the satisfaction of a plan well executed. What did you think of him? Isn't he lovely? Lovely. The word is so inadequate for what William is, what Billy was, what they are together in the space between past and present, that I almost laugh. He seems very nice, I say carefully, distinguished, like you said. We had a pleasant conversation. Just pleasant? Susan's tone carries a note of disappointment. Mom, he's perfect for you. Educated, cultured, still has all his hair, and his daughter Susan speaks so highly of him. His daughter Susan. I still can't quite believe the cosmic joke of it. Our children working together, arranging our reunion without having any idea of the history they're meddling with. Did you know his daughter well? I ask, fishing for information about how this unlikely matchmaking conspiracy came to be. We've worked together on several senior center projects. She's lovely, very organized, very dedicated to making sure the older adults in our community stay socially connected. She mentioned that her father had been lonely since her stepmother passed, and I mentioned that you might enjoy meeting someone with similar interests. Stepmother. The word hits me like a small shock. Of course Ruth would be Susan's stepmother. William would have been married when she was born, already committed to the life he built after I chose Harold over him. It must have been difficult for him, losing his wife, I say, testing the waters of how much I can ask without revealing my deeper interest. 2 years ago, cancer, I think Susan said. They were married for over 50 years. Susan pauses, and I can hear her moving around her kitchen, probably cleaning up after dinner while we talk. He seems like the kind of man who was devoted to his wife, you know? The kind who probably needs encouragement to start socializing again. 54 years, to be precise. I know because I've done the math a dozen times since Sunday, calculating the timeline of William's life, the years he spent with Ruth while I was building my own careful existence with Harold. Mom, are you listening? Susan's voice pulls me back to the present. Sorry, dear, I was just thinking. I said, Susan Patterson mentioned that her father seemed nervous about the lunch. Apparently, he spent an hour deciding what to wear. Susan laughs, the indulgent sound of someone who finds elderly romance both sweet and slightly amusing. Isn't that adorable? At his age, still worrying about making a good impression? If she only knew how much more complicated his nervousness was than simple first date jitters. If she knew he was choosing clothes to meet the woman who broke his heart 57 years ago, the woman he's carried like a torch through 5 decades of marriage to someone else. Did he make a good impression? Susan continues. Are you going to see him again? The question I've been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I don't know yet. Maybe. Mom. Susan's tone shifts to the one she uses when she thinks I'm being unnecessarily stubborn. You've been alone for 6 years. Dad wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life sitting in that house by yourself, watching old movies and talking to the cat. I don't have a cat. You know what I mean. You need companionship, someone to share things with. You're only 84. You could have 20 good years ahead of you. 20 good years. The phrase echoes William's words about having time left, about taking whatever years remain and making them count for something. But 20 years feels impossibly long when I'm contemplating watching someone I love slowly lose themselves to disease. Susan, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were caring for your father-in-law before he went into the nursing home, when his Alzheimer's got bad, was it worth it? The stress, the exhaustion, watching him forget everything? Susan is quiet for a moment, and I can almost hear her thinking, trying to understand why I'm asking such a heavy question in the middle of a conversation about pleasant lunches and new friendships. That's a hard question, Mom. Some days I thought it was going to break David completely. Dad Martinez was such a proud, independent man, and watching him become confused and frightened, it was heartbreaking. She pauses. But David always said that the hardest part wasn't losing his father, it was watching his father lose himself, and that even though the end was terrible, he was grateful for every moment of clarity they had. Every day his father remembered who he was. Do you think David regrets those last few years, the sacrifice? I think he regrets that it had to end that way, but not that he was there for it. Why are you asking? Is everything okay? I realize I've ventured into territory that will raise questions I'm not ready to answer. I was just thinking about getting older, about what lies ahead. Sometimes I wonder if it's better to avoid getting too attached to people when you know how it's likely to end. Oh, Mom. Susan's voice softens with understanding. Is this about William? Are you worried about starting something new at your age? Starting something new. The phrase makes it sound so simple, so hopeful. Not resuming something that ended decades ago, not walking knowingly into heartbreak, just starting fresh with all the optimism that implies. Maybe, I admit. Mom, listen to me. Dad got 10 good years after his retirement before he got sick. 10 years of traveling, of spending time with the grandchildren, of being happy and healthy, and exactly the man you married. Would you trade those 10 years to avoid the 2 difficult ones at the end? The question stops me cold because I know the answer immediately and completely. Those 10 years after Harold retired were some of our best, not passionate or earth-shaking, but comfortable and companionable in ways that felt earned after decades of raising children and building a life together. Harold learned to cook, I learned to play golf badly, we took cruises and visited the grandchildren and settled into the rhythm of people who had successfully completed the major tasks of their lives. No, I say quietly, I wouldn't trade them. Then don't let fear of the ending keep you from having a beginning. You deserve companionship, Mom. You deserve to have someone care about your day, someone to share meals with, someone who thinks you're wonderful. If she only knew that someone already thought I was wonderful, had thought so for 57 years, was sitting in his own house right now, probably having a similar conversation with his own worried children about the complications of late-life romance. I'll think about it, I tell her, which is both true and completely inadequate for the magnitude of what I'm actually considering. Good. And Mom? Call him. Don't wait for him to call you. Women of your generation are allowed to make the first move. After we hang up, I sit in my kitchen with a cup of tea growing cold in my hands, thinking about beginnings and endings and the space between them where actual life happens. Susan's advice about making the first move echoes in my mind, but she doesn't understand that I'm not contemplating a first move, I'm contemplating a last move, a final choice that will define whatever time I have left. I think about William sitting in his too quiet house, probably reading in his chair, maybe thinking about our conversation, maybe regretting his honesty about the Parkinsons. I think about the careful way he stood from his chair at the restaurant, the slight tremor in his hand, the slight tremor in his hand. The matter-of-fact way he spoke about his diagnosis as if it were just another fact to be considered rather than a devastating reorganization of everything he'd planned for his remaining years. And I think about the way his eyes lit up when I mentioned keeping his book of Keats, the way he smiled when I described my routine of reading poetry every morning, the recognition in his face when I admitted that I'd never stopped thinking about him, never stopped wondering what might have been. The practical part of my mind, the part that chose Harold, that built a life of careful compromises and sensible decisions, whispers its familiar warnings. I'm too old for this kind of disruption. I've earned my peace, my routine, my freedom from the complications of love and loss. Why would I choose to put myself through the pain of loving someone who's already marked for decline? But there's another voice, growing stronger with each day that passes since our lunch. It's the voice of the woman who kept a book of poetry hidden in her drawer for 57 years, who read Keats every morning like a prayer to the person she used to be before she became someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's careful guardian of domestic tranquility. That voice reminds me that I've already lost Harold, already survived the slow dissolution of a marriage, already learned that love doesn't protect you from loss. It just makes the loss mean something. That voice asks what I'm saving myself for, what great plans I have for my remaining years that are so important I should avoid the risk of feeling everything again. That voice sounds remarkably like the 27-year-old who said maybe in another life and has been living with the consequences of that choice ever since. I get up and walk to my bedroom, to the nightstand where I keep the book William gave me all those years ago. The binding is cracked from decades of careful reading, the pages yellowed and soft from handling. I open it to the poem he mentioned at lunch, the one about things of beauty being joys forever, and I read it slowly, hearing his young voice in my memory, remembering the afternoon he first read it to me while we lay in summer grass and believed the whole world was waiting for us to claim it. The poem talks about beauty that transcends death, about how moments of perfect loveliness become eternal, independent of the mortal circumstances that created them. Reading it now, I understand what William meant when he said our love story was both love and art, something that exists outside the normal boundaries of time and consequence. I close the book and make my decision. I call him Thursday morning at 9:30, a time I've calculated to be late enough that he'll finish his coffee and newspaper, but early enough that I won't interrupt his lunch preparations. The phone rings 4 times before he answers, and his voice when he says hello carries the careful neutrality of someone who doesn't recognize the number. William, it's Margaret. The silence that follows is long enough that I begin to wonder if the call has dropped, if my old phone has finally given up its tenuous connection to the modern world. Then I hear him take a deep breath, the sound of someone steadying himself. Margaret, I was hoping you'd call. Were you? I wasn't sure. After Sunday, after everything we talked about, I thought you might have second thoughts. Have you had second thoughts? The question is gentle but direct, the way William has always been when something important hangs in the balance. I think about the 3 sleepless nights I've spent since our lunch, the way I've rehearsed this conversation a dozen different ways, the careful lists I've made of reasons to say yes and reasons to say no. Constantly, I admit, but I keep coming back to the same conclusion, which is that I've spent 57 years being sensible, and it's gotten me exactly what I expected: a good life, a safe life, a life that protected me from the worst kinds of pain, but also from the best kinds of joy. I pause, gathering courage for what comes next. I'd like to try being a little less sensible, if you're still interested in that botanical garden visit you mentioned. His laugh is soft and relieved and utterly familiar. I'm very interested, though I should warn you that I've already started planning our route through the gardens, and I may have gotten a little carried away with the poetry selection. How carried away? I've identified 17 different spots where specific poems would be particularly appropriate. And I've started a notebook with detailed annotations about why Wordsworth's Daffodil poem absolutely must be read near the bulb gardens. The image of him sitting at his kitchen table, carefully planning our afternoon like a literature professor designing the perfect curriculum, makes me laugh out loud. 17 poems seems excessive for one afternoon. I thought so too, but then I realized I have 57 years of poetry to share with you, and 17 seemed almost restrained under the circumstances. William, I say, testing the weight of his name again, the way it feels different in my mouth now that I've decided to step toward instead of away from what he's offering. Before we make any garden plans, I need to tell you something. I'm listening. I take a deep breath and speak the words I've been practicing for 3 days. I can't promise you that I'll be strong enough for the hard parts. I can't promise that I won't fall apart when the Parkinson's gets worse, or that I won't resent you for asking me to love you when I know how it's going to end. I understand. But I can promise you that I want to try. I want to find out what our love story looks like when we're old enough to know better, but still young enough to feel everything. I'm using his words back to him, but they feel true in my mouth, right, in a way that surprises me. I want to spend whatever time you have left, whether it's 2 years or 10 years, discovering who we are when we're not 27 and afraid of making the wrong choice. Margaret, he says, and my name sounds like a prayer in his mouth. Are you sure? I'm terrified, I tell him honestly. I'm absolutely terrified. But I'm also more certain about this than I've been about anything in decades. We lost 57 years because I was too afraid to choose love over security. I don't want to lose whatever time we have left because I'm too afraid to choose love over fear. The botanical gardens are beautiful in December, he says, and I can hear the smile in his voice. Different from spring, but beautiful. They have this winter festival with lights strung through the bare branches, and the greenhouse is full of orchids and tropical plants that feel like a miracle when everything outside is dormant. That sounds perfect. Saturday afternoon, I could pick you up around 2. I'll be ready. There's a comfortable pause, the kind that occurs between people who have said the important things and can now relax into the smaller details. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. When you said you'd been thinking about our conversation constantly, what finally tipped the scales? What made you decide to say yes? I consider this seriously, thinking about the late-night hours spent staring at the ceiling, the careful weighing of risks and possibilities, the moment when I finally understood what I was really choosing between. I realized that I've been living like I'm already dead, I say finally. Not unhappy, exactly, but not fully alive either, going through the motions of a life instead of actually living one. And I thought about what you said, about some things being worth having, even when you know they'll end badly. And I realized that's true about everything, isn't it? Everything ends badly if you live long enough. The question is whether you want to spend the time between now and then feeling everything or feeling nothing. And you want to feel everything? I want to feel everything with you, I correct. I want to remember what it's like to have someone care about my thoughts, not just my health and safety. I want to argue about books and cry at movies and wake up looking forward to the day because someone I love is going to be part of it, even knowing how it ends, especially knowing how it ends. Because if we're going to lose this, I want it to be worth losing. The silence that follows is different from the earlier pauses, not hesitant or uncertain, but full of the weight of commitment made and accepted. I love you, he says quietly. I need you to know that. Not just the memory of you, not just the idea of what we might have been, but you, as you are right now, 84 years old and brave enough to choose love over safety. The words hit me like a physical force, knocking loose something I've kept carefully controlled for decades. I start to cry, not the desperate sobs of Sunday, but the quiet tears of someone who has been holding her breath and can finally exhale.